It's been an interesting first week. It's exciting to see what will happen this week. We expect the trial to last anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks, but there's so much to talk about before we go to that live feed in the courtroom. So joining me right now, I'm so happy to bring him in, from Jacksonville State University, forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, it's great to have you back here.
Good to be back with you, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So last week we saw, it was on Friday, it could be called Hospital Day. We saw so many different people from Emory Hospital testifying. But what I want to talk to you about right now, and which we showed in that preview, was the statements that were made by Tex McIver, the victim in this case. It's rare that you actually have the statements from a victim. Now, we should note, she did get shot in the back. We saw her being wheeled into the hospital. She was not in any good condition, Joseph. But I'm curious, in your experience, people that are in that kind of state, you see her right there in the wheelchair, and Tex McIver's in the red shirt trying to wheel her in. People in that condition, what should the jury take away from her saying who was holding the gun and that it may have been, in fact, an accident?
Well, one of the things we have to consider, she's fully aware that she's been shot. If you'll reflect back, you remember that she actually made a comment, I've been shot. And that in and of itself is going to, I think, probably influence her thoughts going forward. She has an awareness that this has occurred. The people that had treated her had mentioned that her blood pressure was dropping precipitously, and that gives you this kind of not euphoric but confused mindset. And she's disoriented sometimes to time and space. She eventually lost consciousness. So she's becoming shocky at this point in time. There's an awareness. I find it interesting that she made these specific comments. And also this idea that we had discussed previously of the weapon, she handed the weapon behind her. And this is still something that has left many of us scratching our heads, that maybe she took it out of the console, which I think is one of the things that has been stated previously, that it's in this bag, and that he had it in the bag. How does this occur? How does this dynamic occur? So that's very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot to dissect here about the testimony from last week. I do want to let our viewers know right now we have a live feed in the courtroom. The judge is on the bench. As soon as we have the audio, we're going to make sure to go to it. And again, Joseph, there's so much to talk about this hospital. If you could briefly, we're going to stand by, Joseph. We have a live feed now in the courtroom, so let's listen in right now.
Consider some of the interruptions that I've had during my examination of witnesses. It seemed to be based on your sense of inefficiency, asking the same question repeatedly. The prosecution throughout the course of the trial has, to some extent, doubled the length of every examination by writing it on the board, as if the court reporter isn't good enough to do it. And we all know what the actual reason for doing that is, but it's extraordinarily inefficient and time-consuming. I've been asking witnesses questions, and there are times when I think the answer is very important, and you know where we're going, you know what the important issues are in the case. The jury doesn't necessarily know what the important issues are in the case. So I may ask a witness what I would describe as kind of three-dimensional answer, as opposed to just yes, with billboards, for example. I know that sounds silly to you, and it sounds insignificant to you, but the prosecution, one of the major parts of their case is, why the hell did Tex McIver drive to Emory rather than Grady? And I think it's important for me to illustrate that to the jury, how irrational that prosecution theory is. And I need to repeat it sometimes. And I need to do it in a way that's more than just, what the billboards say. It doesn't say, okay, move on to the next topic. So, without asking for any particular remedy this time, I'm going to ask you to be a little more non-selective in your insistence on efficiency. And if the prosecution is going to be allowed to write down every answer that they think is important, we should be allowed to at least ask the question twice or in three-dimensional, and not be quite so concerned with whether the clock is ticking on our side and not the prosecution's side.
Okay, I appreciate the observation. I'll share with you my perspective on that. I am mindful of the clock for everyone, but in particular for the jurors, not one side or the other. And I want to make sure they're staying focused. My approach typically is to allow something to get bumped into a couple times before I even get in the mix. And so if you feel like you ask a question once and you start to ask something along those lines, making it two-dimensional rather than one, or three-dimensional rather than two, and I'm suggesting we move on, then that's my mistake. I'm not trying to limit one side and not the other. Where I recall speaking up is when we were on, and I'm not being facetious, like the fifth billboard question with the same witness. That the billboard says, don't go here no matter what if it's trauma. Now, that's okay, but then it's, and don't go here no matter what if it's really serious trauma. I'm making this up. But I'm going to be mindful going forward to be non-selective. That's always been my approach. I haven't perceived that the breaking it down on the whiteboard is necessarily slowing things down, but I'll focus on that now as well. And it's certainly not the case, I believe, that everything every witness says gets put on the whiteboard. It tends to be when it's something that purportedly came from your client's mouth or maybe Ms. McIver's mouth. But I'll stay focused on that as well. I am trying to be fair and balanced in all that I do, consistent with seeing when the jurors start to unplug because they've figured out the point that's being made. And I don't mean to overestimate their ability to figure out, but generally on iteration 3 or 4, and we'll just stick with the billboard scenario, the point's been made. And less so time constraint and more so are you doing your closing argument now is why I tend to intervene. But I will be particularly thoughtful about that as the week starts. I may not remember to be as thoughtful as the week progresses, and I invite you to remind me. It's helpful to have these observations because we're all looking at this trial from a different perspective. So I'll call it a point well taken. Anything else from the defense at this time? Oh, okay. I did receive an email this morning that I haven't digested yet, forwarded to me from Ms. Lyon. I think the state identified a few other segments from Mr. McIver's statement to law enforcement, so I'll take a look at that as well, and then hopefully we'll reach some closure as to where we are with that and if there's more we need to get on the record.
I hope to have, as soon as you make a decision, I hope to have a redacted version of the video and transcript that both sides are important to look at to make sure we're covered within.
Okay. And the state has conferred with defense, not necessarily about these new segments, but what I had flagged as being appropriate, or there hasn't been a conversation yet between the two sides?
Not really.
Okay.
I haven't had time to.
Okay. Fair enough. I think that's it then. The jurors are ready. You ready with your next witnesses? Great. Well, let's bring the jurors in, please.
Yes.
I see we've got a new cameraman. I want to.
So a little court maintenance, court keeping here about how the defense can question witnesses, how to speed up the trial, and things of that nature, a little housekeeping. And the judge even said he'll try to do a better job at hearing some of the ways that the questioning will be done. But what was interesting was the defense attorney said that there was a major issue here about why did Tex McIver tell Danny Joe, after Diane was shot, to go to Emory Hospital as opposed to Atlanta Medical Center or Grady Hospital. Let's talk a little bit about that as the jury comes in. Again, I'm joined by Joseph Scott Morgan from Jacksonville State University, a forensic death investigator. Joseph, what did you make about that, about going to Emory Hospital?
Well, it's at some distance, Jesse. This has been stated before, but we can certainly revisit this because I think it's essential. Emory was roughly door to door 4 miles away from where the alleged incident took place. And it is not at the same trauma level as Grady Hospital, which is in the downtown area, located right in the central business district, or Atlanta Medical Center, which is just across the 85 corridor. I know a lot of the listeners are not necessarily familiar with the geography there.
The question is, did Tex McIver, was he familiar with the fact about that Emory, or were people in that area familiar with the fact that Emory is not a trauma center, and if you have a gunshot wound, you don't go there?
I can't expect that everyone in that vehicle knew that, but I know that Tex McIver had worked in the downtown area. Everybody that pays attention to the news, even peripherally in Atlanta, if you're not directly involved in it, like many of us are in law enforcement, you're fully aware of what they do at Grady. You're fully aware of the fact that it's a major trauma center.
Joseph, stand by. We have the court resuming. Let's listen in.
I heard the court on Friday, so we are pivoting to a new area.
Strength before I have a seat. Raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you should give the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God? Yes, sir. Will please have a seat. Get as close to the mic as you can. For the purposes of the court's record, please state and spell your name.
My name is Allen, A-L-L-A-N, Craig, C-R-A-I-G, Stringer, S-T-R-I-N-G-E-R.
You're good with the microphone, Mr. Stringer. Everyone's awake now.
You might be surprised.
Good morning, sir.
How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
Wonderful day in the neighborhood.
Okay. Give me 1 second just to get set up very briefly. All right. Could you turn and introduce yourself to the jurors by restating your name and, sir, tell them how old you are.
Oh, gosh.
Surprise.
My name is Allen Craig Stringer. I'm 71 years old.
All right. And, Mr. Stringer, could you share with the jurors a little bit about your educational background?
Went through the Navy. Was in college, went to the Navy during Vietnam. Came back, went to college, got most of my associate's degree. Got into billboards 37 years ago. I've been vice president of about 3 billboard companies. I've owned my own company for about 10 and a half years and sold it. As late, I was just involved in the settlement and sale of Corey companies to Link Media Services, who's owned by, I can't think of her name, but Warren Buffett's sister anyway. One owns real estate. She also owns the outdoor division. And I've been retired since December of last year.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, that's December 2017.
Yes, sir.
You retired from where?
I retired from Link Media Group.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, did you ever do an employment stint with U.S. Enterprises?
Yes, it was under, I had 2 companies that I ran under that, U.S. Media. We sold 8 years after I started, and then I'd been there 17 and a half years, so we had the second one when all this happened. We sold to Link Media Group, and I was involved in that also.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors, the 17 years, is that how long you worked for U.S. Enterprises?
I worked for U.S. Enterprises March 1999, March 1st, up till now, and directly for Diane
McIver.
McIver.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, when you started back in the 90s, what was your position and how did it evolve, if it ever did evolve?
6 months into my employment, I became vice president of U.S. Media's group, and I also was special projects director for the Corey Entertainment Company.
Okay. What kind of company was that?
Corey Entertainment, not good. The One-Armed Bandits and all the truck stops. We had Pilot, we had Flying J, we had, it was a long time ago now.
A long time
We did sell that.
You sold that?
We sold that.
So within convenience stores or gas stations, you had the little.
We were at a much different level. We had all like across the United States.
The gambling machines.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors when did you really come to be acquainted with Diane McIver?
1 hour after I started working for her.
Okay. And where did you fit in the hierarchy at U.S. Enterprises in relationship to Diane McIver?
I was number 2. I mean, she was the president of all companies, and I was vice president of all the billboards and whatever she wanted me to do.
Okay. Let me show you State's Exhibit 215. There's an open time for the bill, right?
I have no idea what that means.
I understand, but the time right there is what? If you convert it to regular time.
8:19:43.
Okay. And this close time, if you converted it to regular time, is what?
9:03.
Total amount of the bill?
131.82.62.
Okay. And 1 bottle of Trinity Oaks. That's the bottle of wine.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
$25.
Yes.
Now, can you tell the jurors, was that the last time that you saw or spoke to Diane McIver?
Yes.
And when did you find out that something had happened to her?
In the morning when I walked into the office.
Okay. And is that the office at Corey Company?
Yes.
Where the smokestack is?
Yes.
When you got to the office, who was there?
Most of the operations people were there. Other than that, I have no idea.
Okay. Let me show you a series of photos. They've been marked as State's Exhibits number 221, 22, 223, and 224. Let's take a look at each one of those individually.
I'm sorry, what were those numbers again?
221 through 224. Can you recognize and can you identify those photos?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do those photos fairly and accurately show the Corey Company from different vantage points?
Yeah.
In the office that you worked at with Diane McIver?
Yes.
I would tender, Your Honor, to evidence 221 through 224.
Okay. Admitted.
This is State's Exhibit 224. Just for the jurors to describe what we see at 224.
Well, on the left side of the picture is the entrance in between the smokestack and the tower. Tower's in the very back of the property. Smokestack, as you're looking at the building, is on the left-hand side of the building, right on the connector. I can't see where the office is, where you go in or not, but that was sort of where we parked.
Okay. This is State's Exhibit 222. You recognize that?
Yep.
And can you tell the jurors to describe for them what we see in 222?
All right, we have a double gate that came in the front.
If you touch the screen, I think you can make a mark on it.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Here we had a double gate, one that rose up, one that slid to let you in. This is the main entrance into and then around here was parking. Here was executive parking.
That's what Diane McIver parked. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And then you also have a garage area back there in the back, right?
Garage area right here led to a stage that we had back there, and also storage.
Okay. Now, as part of the billboard company that you had, that you ran the division there at Corey, in this photo, states 223, can you identify for the jurors where is the Corey smokestack in this photograph?
Right there.
Okay.
Across from Grady.
Right across from Grady Hospital, right? Mm-hmm. Now, had you ever seen the defendant travel to the Corey offices there where the smokestack is before? You ever seen the defendant at Corey before?
Yes.
By how many times do you think he's been to that building? In the 17 years that you worked there, in the 13 years that you know him?
Once.
Once that you've seen him?
No.
Oh.
Once that Austin got up, I guess about 2-3 years old, Tex would come by some Friday afternoons and pick him up and pick Diane up to go to the ranch. 100 times, guessing.
Okay. Have you been to the ranch before?
I lived there for about a year while they were building the pool.
Okay. And can you give some context about when the pool was being built?
Absolutely not.
Was it before or after they got married?
I wouldn't be able to give you an honest answer.
Okay. Do you even know when they got married?
I was there.
Okay. Do you remember what year it was?
Nope.
Okay. Was the pool built at the time that they got married?
Yes.
Okay. And so you would have stayed there about that time?
Right. Just the period of time. The pool took forever to build because every time it got halfway built, it rained and filled it up with water. It had to dry out. So there were some very expensive items in the outlaw house, and so I basically stayed there. I needed a place to stay. She had a place to stay. I stayed there, and sort of guarded somewhat the place, you know.
Okay. And by the outlaw house, are you talking about the saloon that was built out in the back?
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
That saloon was built at the time that Diane McIver and the defendant got married, correct?
I believe it was.
Now, can you tell the jurors, that morning when you got to the office and you found out that something had happened to Diane, what did you do?
Call Tex.
You called the defendant? Yes?
Yes.
And did you reach him?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors, what did you say to him?
I said, Tex, what the hell's going on?
And what did he say to you?
He told me that Danny Joe and Diane were in an automobile accident on Hill Street, and Diane passed in the night.
Are you sure about that?
I swore on the Bible, or swore. Yes.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay. In connection with this event, do you recall speaking to not only Detective Smith, but myself, and also testifying before the grand jury? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to show you.
There is a rest of the story if I can give it.
There's no question,
Sure.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
Hold that thought.
Sure.
Interesting witness, Alan Craig Stringer, a man who worked with Diane, was friends with Diane and Tex, talked about his relationship with her, his relationship with Tex, playing golf, but now it's getting into actually what happened when Diane died, and it got very interesting. I'm here with Joseph Scott Morgan from Jacksonville State University, a forensic death investigator. Now, we're going to have a lot to talk about this case, but what are your initial impressions from listening to this witness, Joseph?
He's very solidly grounded in his beliefs, it seems like. He's got, I don't know, that one
Joseph,
shot that we have.
Sorry to interrupt, Joseph. I know we have the audio. We don't want to miss anything this witness says. Let's listen in live.
No worries.
You see, transcript of Craig Stringer before the Fulton County Grand Jury, right? Can you tell the jurors what date did you give that testimony before the grand jury?
April 26, 2017.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, at the time that you gave that statement, had you already talked to Detective Smith from the Atlanta Police Department?
Yes.
And then you were kind enough to meet with me over in the Corey building, correct?
Yes.
And we talked to you about the case, correct?
Yes.
Now, let me ask you, and this might seem like a common sense question, do you think your memory was better back then than it is sitting here today? Do you believe that? Is that possible?
No.
Okay. Why do you say that?
I have no idea what the difference my memory would be from now until then.
Okay.
I am older. I've fallen 6 times. What do we need to say?
Okay. All right. You've had some challenges since then.
I've had some challenges.
I understand. But as you sit here today, you're not currently under the influence or anything like that?
No.
Okay. Take a look at page 5 of that transcript. And I want you to just read the page silently to yourself.
Again, this is Alan Craig Stringer, a man that worked with Diane McIver, was friends with Diane and Tex. Let's listen in live.
Wait, first of all, let me direct you with a question, okay?
All right.
Have you had a chance to read it?
Well, I've got to the point where it's the wrong person.
Mr. Stringer, hold on.
Okay.
It's just a process, okay? We're going to get to it.
All right.
Okay. Did you have a chance to read the transcript?
I'll read it completely.
That page?
Okay, everybody. So again, you're watching Alan Craig Stringer, a friend of Diane and Tex. He worked with them. Well, he worked with Diane, but he played golf with Tex and Diane. Now, he was one of the last people to see her alive. They had dinner together. And he was just getting into the part where he found out that Tex...
Okay.
Let's listen in now.
Have you had a chance to read it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so now, after having read your transcript before the grand jury in April of last year, can you tell the jurors, did you testify to something different to the grand jurors that you're saying today about what exactly the defendant told you when you called him?
Based on this, yes.
Okay. So tell the jurors, now that you've had a chance to read the transcript, is your memory refreshed about exactly what you testified about earlier when I asked you what did the defendant say when you called him?
Well,
first of all, just answer that question. Is your memory refreshed now?
I'm refreshed.
Okay, okay. All right. And so can you tell the jurors what did you say to the grand jurors that the defendant said to you when you called him the day you learned that Diane McIver had passed?
Okay, line 7.
No, you can't read it.
I'm not going to read it. I'm going to tell you where it's at.
Okay, okay.
Line 7 through 13 on the page.
Right. Okay.
When I called Tex first and he told me the Hill Street story, Mr. Corey came in later and told the whole company that Diane had an accident last night and was shot in the back. And he said it was accidentally by Tex.
Okay.
I called, and here's where it kicks in. I called him back again. I said, what the heck is the story on this? Mr. Corey just said you shot her in the back. And He said, I didn't want to tell you, it's right in here, I didn't want to tell you all this to get you involved in it with the police or whatever. I said, I already am, basically, because they asked me about it. And, but that's when Tex said, I basically did not want to get you involved in it. And I said, okay. I did not go away happy.
Okay. So, let me see if I understand what you're saying. I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, okay? At the time that you talked to the grand jurors, you didn't tell them about the first conversation you had with the defendant. Is that what you're saying?
I did not. It was, I considered it hearsay.
Okay, so this is some interesting testimony. You have Alan Craig Stringer talking and testifying, and he basically revealed a very interesting two conversations they had with Tex McIver. And that's really what's at issue right here is the first conversation that he had with Tex was about what happened to Diane. And the first thing that Tex said was that it was a car accident. The next time he had a conversation with Tex was after Mr. Corey, who is the owner of the company, came forward and said that Diane, it was an accident and she was shot in the back. And then he had a follow-up conversation with Tex. And Tex said, I didn't want to get you involved. I didn't want to tell you what the full story is. Whether this is his testimony today is working well for the prosecution or working well for the defense remains to be seen. Let's listen in live.
I want you to tell the jury whether or not on that exhibit you see your phone number, the one that ends in 6569.
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors if on that exhibit where you see the last four digits that references 6569, is there also a number that references the number for the defendant, Claude McIver?
8.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Tell me what the last four digits are for Claude McIver.
8137.
Now, can you tell the jurors if on that exhibit does it reference calls between your number and the number for Mr. McIver?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury, is there a time listed for the calls?
Yes.
What's the first time for the first call you see?
711.
711? That from
him to me.
From him to you. At 711. Is that AM?
AM.
That's on the 26th?
Yes.
Okay. What's the second reference?
731.
Is it from him to you or you to him?
Him to me.
What's the next one?
851. Him.
Who?
Text to me.
What's the next one?
952. Me to text.
How about the next one?
1408. Me to text.
What time is 1408?
208.
Any others?
211. Text to me.
Your Honor, I would tender states 344 and others at this time.
Any objection to states 344? It's admitted.
And states 344 just appears on the screen in front of you, correct?
Yes.
Is that right, Mr. Stringer? Okay.
Yes.
Let me just zoom in so folks can see. Okay. So in that first column is the number of calls, correct?
Correct.
What's the total number of calls between you and the defendant on that day?
6.
6. And then it gives the date, correct?
Correct.
And the time.
Correct.
And the length of the call.
Correct.
I'm sorry?
I don't think you're pointing at the right column.
Okay. see what you're saying. The length of the call, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the originating number?
Yes.
Okay. And the person who actually makes the call, correct?
Yes.
And then the terminating party or the person who answers the call.
Yes.
And then there's the name of the person.
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you remember speaking to Detective Darren Smith from the Atlanta Police Department on September 27th of 2016?
Yes.
That would have been the day after these calls, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, when you spoke to Detective Smith, you did not tell him, or strike to answer a better question, did you tell him about the very first phone call you had with the defendant where he talked about there being a car accident near Hill Street?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Why didn't you tell the detective?
I have no idea. There may have been a little bit of dismay on my part. I don't know.
Okay.
17 and a half years? Yeah.
And when you say dismay after 17 and a half years, explain to the jurors, what are you talking about? What were you feeling there?
How would you feel if your best friend for 17 years got shot in the back?
Okay. And at the time, you were also friends with the defendant?
Absolutely.
Now, can you tell the jurors, after you spoke to Detective Smith, did you have another conversation with the defendant?
I'm sure I did if they got records for it, but I mean, it wasn't, there was a period of time in which we could not talk to each other.
I understand.
So I don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
I have talked to him, yes, once he was released to talk.
Hold on. Let me direct you with a question. Let me direct you better with a question. Was there a phone conversation between yourself and the defendant where you talked about how much wine was left on the table at dinner?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have that conversation with the defendant after you talked to the detective on September 27th?
Yes.
Okay. You remember that?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors, without leaving anything out, okay, what did the defendant say to you?
It was after the second game of golf that we played together. We went and ate at McDonald's, and sitting across the table, he asked me that I discuss the amount of alcohol that was drank, and
Discuss that with who?
with anybody, with the police, with anybody that had called me to talk to me, to ask me about the situation after I told him that they had already contacted me. And I said, I don't even think I thought about it. There was not that much drink that it was worth talking about.
But the defendant asked you about it.
Yeah.
And did he ask you what you told the police?
The truth.
Listen to my question. Did he ask you what you told the police?
Yes.
Okay. And when he asked you that, what did you tell him?
The truth.
Okay. Let me show you a couple of photos. Any objection? Okay. Your Honor, I'm going to tender two photographs. They're marked as State's Exhibits number 338 and 339. Okay. Okay. There being no objection, I would just move them into the record.
338, 339. Okay, they're admitted.
This is State's Exhibit number 339. I'm publishing for the jury. You recognize the individuals in that photo?
Yes.
And can you tell what they're holding in their hands?
Looks like a couple glasses of dark liquid, probably wine.
Okay. Now, I think you've already told the jurors that whatever dismay you felt on the 26th when you talked to the defendant, You ended up going to church about that.
Yes.
Correct? Jackson Irrelevant. Goes to the state of feelings of the witness. Yeah, that's overruled. How soon after Diane McIver died did you play golf with the defendant?
Once he was released.
Oh, wait. I wasn't trying to.
I understand, but just let's focus it in a different way.
Okay, let me ask you a better question, okay? Did you play golf with the defendant after Diane died?
Twice.
Okay. 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 Okay, thank you very much. And I think that's all my questions.
Okay. Mr. Samuel, do you have questions for Mr. Stringer?
You're watching the testimony of Alan Craig Stringer. Now, he's about to be cross-examined. If it's anything like it was last week, you know that Don Samuel is going to tear this guy apart. It's going to be really interesting to hear more about this conversation that he had with Tex. And we should let our viewers know that we believe today Danny Jo Carter will testify. She is the woman that was in the car with Tex McIver and Diane on the night of the shooting. You do not want to miss that testimony. It is key for anybody following this case. So Danny Jo Carter will testify hopefully today. So again, you are watching the testimony of Alan Craig Stringer. And let's bring in our guest right now, Joseph Scott Morgan, to talk a little bit about this conversation that Mr. Stringer had with Tex. He first said that he only had 2 conversations. Now that he had 6 conversations with him on the day after Diane died. Now, Joseph, I know that's not what you came on to talk about, but I'm so sorry, Joseph. I have to go back to the courtroom. We have the audio. Stand by. Do not go anywhere. We have a lot to talk about. Let's go.
Mr. Stringer. As usual, during the break, don't talk about the case. No outside research. We'll get you back in here shortly. Thank you for your time so far today.
All rise for the jurors.
All right, the jurors are being excused. Let's go bring back Joseph. Joseph, what did you think of Mr. Stringer's testimony?
Wow, it was kind of a wow moment for me when he made the comment initially, and he kind of glared over in the direction of the defendant relative to car accident, because that's exactly what he said. Initially it didn't come out as she's been shot. It's that Danny Jo and Diane had both been involved in a car accident, and I found that kind of interesting from Jump Street, that this was the information that was passed between him and Tex. The look that he shot over there was kind of telling at that moment in time.
It's interesting because this case, again, I'll say it from the beginning, I said it last week, you can show that this was a cover-up of an accident. Again, I don't know how much he's trying to show that this was a cover-up of a murder. I don't know how much the jury yet is convinced that this is a murder, as maybe this was an accident and a man who didn't want to get in trouble. He knew he was the one that fired the gun. He knew he was the one that was responsible for his wife's death. But was it intentional or not? Now, what the state has done has begun the case by doing motive first, and then we'll show later the actual trajectory of the bullet and the way that the gun was positioned. We expect that testimony later on. When we do get to that testimony, Joseph, what do you expect?
I think that when we get to that testimony, it's going to be compelling. There will be a lot of physical evidence and descriptors relative to the injuries that she sustained. And again, back to positionality. What relationship was the weapon? Going back to what we had talked about previously, Jesse, where this idea of her reaching behind her with the weapon and the weapon discharging, and she making the comment that she had it was an accident and this sort of thing, and but then someone you remember the one nurse from on Friday that made the comment that she heard that he said that he had been cleaning his weapon in the back seat. The dynamics of this thing are quite fascinating to watch from a forensic standpoint when we begin to marry up the physical findings that are going to be very well presented, I can guarantee you that, coupled along with what this testimonial evidence is coming out.
Yeah, I can't wait to have you on when we hear about the way that the bullet was fired, the trajectory, the way the gun was positioned. That's Joseph, that's your sweet spot. We're going to definitely have you back on for that. But stay tuned, because we're actually going back into the courtroom. There's some audio, and then hopefully Joseph and I can talk a little bit more about this case.
Conference that precipitated the break that the jurors are taking right now. On at least 2 instances when Mr. Stringer was trying to place in his chronology when something happened in response to a question from the state that appeared to me to be eliciting this. Mr. Stringer started to allude to Mr. McIver being released from somewhere, presumably jail, and Mr. Samuel justifiably was concerned about that and asked that I talk with Mr. Stringer to make sure that he not use that, at least out loud, as his reference point going forward. Hence my cautionary instruction to Mr. Stringer. Mr. Samuel, anything you want to get on the record in connection with either of those bench conferences or my direction to Mr. Stringer?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Rucker, anything else?
No.
Okay. Then we'll have a 5-ish minute break and see if the jury's ready to come back in and continue with the examination of Mr. Stringer. Thank you.
Exhibit last time. Oh, okay, thank you so much.
All right, so they're going to a break, but I want to play our viewers something, and then I want to get Joseph's view on it. This is the testimony from last week. It's Dr. Suzanne Hardy. She was one of the attending physicians at Emory Hospital who spoke with Diane, the victim, before she died. Take a listen.
I would have said about the same, but I have no specific recollection. I mean, I would guess between 4 to 6 nurses and techs around me. There was at least one other doctor, if not 2 at the time, helping me. Scribe still in the corner.
Okay. So I'm clear, when you say techs, that's T-E-C-H-S.
Technician.
Technician,
Yes.
not techs as in the defendant in this case. He was not in it.
Correct. No, he was not.
Okay. So we've got several technicians, we got nurses. So what is going on? How is the activity in the room at that time?
It was pretty controlled. Everyone has their own job.
Right. To an observer standing outside of the room, does it kind of look like a controlled ballet, or is it scrambled? What does it look like?
We joke it's a controlled chaos.
Right. How about noise in the room? Is it particularly noisy?
Not particularly so that I remember.
Okay. And so when Diane McIver began to speak, you were able to hear her based on where you were positioned.
Correct.
Okay. And if you need to refer to the medical records, I'll just put them here for you. They've been marked at the end of the evidence. It states 241.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me get this back.
Thanks.
All right. Now, can you tell the jurors, did you say something to Diane McIver when she began to speak, or did she just speak on her own?
She probably spoke on her own. I don't remember specifics of what she said to make me start asking her questions.
Okay. But you do remember asking her questions?
Yes.
Can you tell the jurors what question did you ask Diane McIver?
Once you know it's a trauma, you kind of go down a pathway. So the first question is just any medical history, and then any surgical history. I don't know if I asked for allergies or not, but that's one of the next ones we ask about. And then, I guess at the same time, then we were rolling her, so we were trying to determine any more of her wounds. So that's when I saw the other gunshot wound on her back and asked her, did you hear a gun? Or I asked her where the gun was held. And she said, I was holding it behind my back. Do you want me to continue with this?
Hold on one second.
Okay.
The question you asked was what?
Where was the gun held? In a trauma, you cannot determine the exit or entrance wounds, and so just by asking that question, you could determine where the entrance was.
Okay. Because you were trying to find out where the bullet went in.
Yes.
Okay. And her response was what?
I was holding it behind my back.
Okay, so that doctor that you just heard, Diane first said to her, I was holding it behind my back, meaning the gun. Now, you'll hear the doctor later on say that she thought that was an odd statement, and Diane then said, no, he was holding it behind my back, presumably meaning Tex McIver. Let's bring in Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University. We talked about this at the beginning of the program, the idea about where the gun was held, and also the idea that Diane, who's a victim, and you rarely hear victims providing some sort of information to people that are later testifying in their own murder case, about where the gun was positioned. What do you make about that statement and the position of the gun?
Well, she was lucid enough to be able to offer a little bit of information to this physician. And additionally, she was lucid enough to be able to correct herself. She stated, I was holding the weapon behind my back, or the gun behind my back, and then she said he was holding it. So I think that a lot is going to turn on this. I don't know how much you make of this. Again, we were talking about the physiological effects that are going on with this woman at this moment in time. She sustained a gunshot wound to her back. I'm unclear as to the wound track at this moment in time. A lot of that will be revealed, but we do know that there was significant blood loss, so much to the point where her BP was dropping precipitously, and so this is going to affect her ability to recall things and this sort of thing. She'll get kind of groggy as they're beginning to try to treat her. The doctor, though, back to her, she's attempting to assess, not from a forensic standpoint, and that's very important for the people to understand at home. She's looking at this from a treatment perspective, Jesse. How can I save this woman's life? So it's not. She's not vested here forensically. They're not even thinking about a case at this moment in time. And that's why this makes this dynamic very interesting within the context of the courtroom versus what the physician is saying that's trying to save this woman's life. After the fact, we rely on people in my line of work in medical legal death investigation that can kind of put all of the pieces together after the fact.
Yeah. We do have a live feed back in the courtroom. We're waiting for it to go live. But, Joseph, I know our time together is coming to an end. I do have another question for you, though, in terms of holding the gun. It's interesting because we know from certain testimony that Diane handed the gun over to Tex, and we know that there was drinking involved. That's what the last witness was talking about. How much could there be a confusion about whether she thought she was actually holding the gun? Because we really don't know what was happening in the car. Now, we should note, Danny Jo Carter, the other woman in the car, will testify today. That is the plan. And maybe we'll learn a little bit more about what happened. But that confusion about who was holding the gun and what exactly happened is still unclear in my mind, and still unclear, I think, in the juror's mind, about how a gun was taken out of the console, handed to Tex, and why it was ultimately fired. Something doesn't add up.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's really compelling for me, Jesse, here is this idea of consumption of alcohol and her treatment. And just so that we understand, they're trying to save her life, right? She's got tremendous blood loss. They're transfusing her, I would imagine. They've hung several units of blood. So at autopsy, when she makes it there, how how much can we rely on her blood alcohol level that they would have drawn post-mortem, and try to understand that. And that's going to be another compelling part to this. We can't really speak to, at least I can't at this moment in time, to Tex. I don't think that blood was drawn on him. I have no idea. But we do know that some sample would have been taken on Diane. And those numbers are going to be very important. They're going to talk to, I would imagine, the forensic pathologist about this. They'll talk about how this affects her perception and how this kind of plays into blood loss as well.
So we are talking about the testimony of Dr. Suzanne Hardy from Friday. And the other thing that she testified to was the fact that Diane said that this was an accident. But that's not the only thing. Before she was intubated, before she wouldn't be able to speak, she was asked, do you want to see Tex? And she said no. A lot to talk about there. Joseph Scott Morgan, thank you for joining us today. We have to head back into the courtroom, but we can't wait to have you back on.